from disasters and food scarcity. So I now welcome to the stage Sheikh Hasina, Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Mr. Bill Gates, representing the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, Mr. David Malpass, President of the World Bank, and Tuniak Katan, who's the Indigenous Peoples representative to the summit. Please welcome on the stage. Thank you. So, Sheikh Hasina, we'll start with you. For people experiencing the impact of climate disaster, the most important issue is a quick recovery. And so I'd like to hear from you what Bangladesh has done in this regard, because, of course, you are a striking example of the power of effective adaptation. And so tell us what can be done to prepare for and prevent disasters. I think you're comfortable here. Thank you, Sheikh Hasina. Yes, and this session, of course, is everybody has 3 minutes, so I'd be grateful if you could stay within your time constraints. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Ms. Moderator. The impacts of climate change have been devastating on the life and livelihood of almost all 2 billion people every year. Be it floods in Bangladesh and India, Cyclone Idai in Southern Africa, or Hurricane Dorian in the Caribbean, disasters have been creating havoc to our society and our economy. Bangladesh is a country of 160.55 million people and had only 147 square kilometer land, is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. But Bangladesh is not amateur. But Bangladesh is going to be sufferer. Frequency of extreme climate events is increasing. But in Bangladesh, casualties are reduced to almost zero from hundreds of thousands few years back due to efficient early warning system. We have adaptation as resilience building measures, including an 82-year Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100 to deal with issues and challenges of climate change, natural disasters, and water management. We have built 4,291 cyclone shelters and 523 flood shelters in the coastal areas and other flood-affected areas to give shelter during disasters. We evacuate people and put them in the cyclone shelter. And other time, we use those cyclone shelter as the school or healthcare or office or other purpose. Some 56,000 volunteers are available to warn and facilitate preparation addresses, cyclone and natural disasters in Bangladesh. I am therefore delighted to launch today the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, REAP. It is an ambitious new initiative created by the United Kingdom, Finland, and the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. The REAP aims to make 1 billion people around the world safer from disasters by 2025 by bringing the humanitarian, development, and climate communities together in their action. And we are always ready to share our experience. Bangladesh has shown how a strong early warning system and a coordinated approach in disaster management can make a big difference. So, We join this initiative to share our experiences with the other vulnerable countries as well as to learn from others in mitigating the risks of future hazards. Let us work together for a safe world for our future generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Thank you very much indeed for your words. Now, Mr. Katan, Tuniak Katan, I'd like you to tell us what specific initiatives are being launched by Indigenous people today to help increase climate ambition for mitigation and adaptation, and how can these help advance the goals of the Paris Agreement? Thank you.
Señor Secretario General,
Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies present here, good afternoon. I am Tutiat Katan of the Shuar people, and I come here on behalf of my brothers and sisters, indigenous peoples of the world. The indigenous people make up more than 400 million people, and we protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. And here we commit to working with all to address climate change with a focus based on human rights, leading holistic plans to protect our diversity, our biocultural diversity, and ensure inclusion of those sectors which have been disenfranchised, ensuring access to lands, territories, resources, free determination, and free, previous and informed consent, access to the development of renewable energies in keeping with our self and free determination. Based on these actions, we propose protecting more lands, resources, and indigenous territories, contributing to the biocultural diversity, to carbon, and reducing carbon emissions, protecting the means of traditional livelihood of the indigenous people, food sovereignty, water sovereignty, and cultural transmission, supporting indigenous peoples to be resilient, producing climate solutions which are effective using system and knowledges from the indigenous people's know-how, as well as scientific knowledge. But that's not enough. We need to effectively implement the Declaration of the United Nations with full participation and contribution of indigenous peoples in other climate actions and strengthening specific national contributions. Independent support for our meetings, world meetings, regional meetings, and national meetings. Access to information which is relevant and broken down. And most especially, a strong commitment to maintain global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Actions, territories, rivers, and oceans of the indigenous peoples will all benefit each of your nations. There's no time left. We must make a pact for life and for our future. Thank you.
Katan, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Katan. So, Bill Gates, you're here today to make some significant announcements to support people who are extremely vulnerable to climate change, including smallholder farmers. So, please let us know what these are. Thank you.
I'm honored to be here today representing the Global Commission on Adaptation, which the other co-chairs are the ex-Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, and the about-to-be Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva. Adaptation is not received as much attention as mitigation, and yet it is equally important. I also want to thank the many governments who have co-convened the Commission's effort and are seeking to advance the recommendations. We were formed to galvanize global action to make sure the world's most vulnerable populations are allowed to adapt as much as possible to the climate change they'll face. I really appreciated Ban Ki-moon's vision and commitment to this mission. Thanks to his leadership, he can claim a legacy that includes two very important frameworks that will shape the future of the planet: the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Climate change will impact every one of the 7 billion people on the planet. But the hardest hit will be the world's most vulnerable people, like the 500 million farming families in places like sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Ironically, these are the people who did the least to cause climate change. Climate change will reduce their harvests and strain the global food system at the same time that global food demand will increase by over 60% mid-century. The world can still prevent the absolute worst effects of climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and developing new technologies and sources of energy. But the effect of rising temperatures are already underway. And even in the best case of lowering emissions, we have to help people adapt. Today, we're announcing the launch of the first action track of the Global Commission on Adaptation, focused on food and agriculture. Over the next year, the Commission will focus on scaling up support to farmers in 5 areas, including expanding coverage of digital advisory services, expanding access to farmer finance and insurance, adopting innovations in ecological practices, and implementing policies which incentivize resilience. The final area is increasing investment in R&D and doubling the investment in the CGIAR system. The CG system hosts the world's largest and most advanced network of crop breeders, and it prioritizes the need of smallholder farmers while helping all farmers in the world. Investment in CGIAR has proven to be highly cost-effective, generating returns of up to $17 for every dollar invested, with significant economic benefits for both producers and consumers. But major financial commitments are needed to help the CGIAR system develop new climate-smart innovations that can help farmers adapt to increasing weather variability and more frequent climate shocks and stressors. Today, I'm happy to announce a number of new commitments. A coalition that includes the European Commission, Netherlands, UK, World Bank, Switzerland, and Sweden has promised to deliver over $791 million to support efforts to help smallholder farmers adapt to climate change. Additionally, Germany is committing to build resilience of an additional 60 million smallholder farmers. These commitments include $652 million over 3 years for a range of agriculture research and development initiatives carried out across the CG system and include significant increases in support. As part of this total, our foundation is pledging $310 million over the next 3 years for CG. We will increasingly support the CG shared agenda to tackle climate change and make food production in the developing world more productive. While important, these commitments are just the first installment towards achieving the Commission's recommendation of doubling the CG budget. We must do more to help smallholder farmers build resilience in the face of climate change. And I urge all governments present to continue what more they can do to support this critical institution over the next 12 months. The World Bank has been a great partner in this, and I know Dave Malpass has been a big supporter of that, so I thank him for his commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bill Gates. Well, David Malpass from the World Bank, for people who do experience the impact of climate disaster, as we were saying earlier, the most important thing is a quick recovery. So I wonder if you could elaborate on what will be done by the World Bank and others to provide 500 million poor people with insurance coverage. Thank you.
Thank you. But let me first begin by commending Bill for his work and efforts on the adaptation agenda. The boost to CGIAR is especially welcome, and we're proud to support this effort. As we, the World Bank Group, seeks to end extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity, we aim to achieve these goals in a sustainable way. In the face of extreme weather events, we want to support countries and economies to be better prepared. I've seen firsthand how the early finance can help communities get ahead of disasters. Earlier this year, I visited Mozambique shortly after Cyclone Idai, hit the region. Within days of the cyclone hitting, the government had dispersed $9 million to support its response and recovery efforts. That early financing is very important. It was part of a $90 million World Bank loan that was related to resilience. Funding for the Global Risk Financing Facility, or GRIF, helps governments design cyclone insurance against events like this. The GRIF is an innovative new facility that is helping countries around the world scale up financial solutions for situations like this. The GRIF is helping to boost resilience at all levels of the economy, at the macro level to build better buffers, at the mid-level to get firms back into action quickly, and at the micro level to protect households, assets, and livelihoods. I was in Mozambique and saw that those port facilities, those cities on the coast that had good buffers, were able to get back into business quickly and begin supporting the people that were really hardest hit by the cyclone. And more resources, public and private, are being committed to support expansion of this work to additional countries. For example, we're pleased to support the INSU Resilience Goals Partnership and its Vision 2025 to scale up ambition for risk financing and build resilience for the poor and vulnerable. Germany has just pledged an additional 20 million euros, and the UK pledged 90 million pounds to further expand risk finance programs to many countries. And the private insurance industry has pledged to mobilize $5 billion until 2025 under the umbrella of the Insurance Development Forum. As the likelihood of disasters becomes more predictable, we need to help countries make their ability to respond more predictable as well. I'd like to thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much indeed, Mr. Balpas. And thank you to all our presenters. Thank you so much. Right, so I'd like to now welcome to the stage His Excellency General Prayut Chan-o-cha, Prime Minister of Thailand. And Prime Ministers, you're making your way in. I'd just like to say that climate change, of course, is one of the challenges that Thailand and the ASEAN region are facing. So we'd like to know what ASEAN's plans to achieve the region's potential are, whilst at the same time reducing their emissions and adapting to the impacts of climate change. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President of the General Assembly, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, today I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the 10 ASEAN member states. ASEAN welcomes the convening of the Climate Action Summit today and commends the SG for his leadership in addressing the climate change issue. Today, these disasters are happening, whether it be land, air, the temperature is increasing and it is affecting everyone, whether it be flood or drought. ASEAN is highly vulnerable since most of our peoples are affected by the climate change in low-lying coasts and river plains. Increased impacts of climate change have threatened the region's economic and social progress. Therefore, we have strived to strengthen our resilience by implementing both climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. We, ASEAN, is committed to be actively involved in global climate action at all levels. Globally, ASEAN strongly supports efforts under the UNFCCC. All of ASEAN member states are parties to the Paris Agreement and all have communicated their NDCs. Regionally, ASEAN has been implementing strategic measures under the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Blueprint 2025 to realize a sustainable climate and a resilient community. ASEAN stresses the learning process of how to coexist happily with the environment. Our key targets include 1, energy transition. ASEAN has exceeded its energy efficiency target, reducing energy intensity by more than 21.9% compared to 2005, which is well ahead of its 2020 target. It will also continue to work towards long-term target to reduce energy intensity by 30% within 2025 and also increase renewable energy mix by 23%, also by 2025. 2, land transport. ASEAN aims to reduce average fuel consumption of new light-duty vehicles sold in ASEAN by 26% between 2015 and 2025. It will also introduce and strengthen fiscal policy measures based on fuel economy or CO2 emissions at national levels and promote adoption of national fuels consumption for light-duty vehicles, striving for a regional standard in the long term. ASEAN stresses direct linkages between climate action and all means of implementation, such as capacity building, technology transfer, and financial support. Today is an opportunity for developed countries to act on their financial commitment. And we hope to see their strong political signal to scale up their climate finance that is secure, predictable, and sustainable in post-2020. The IPCC special report warned us that we have less time to avoid irreversible climate change. No country can fight the climate change alone. Thus, we have to work together. We have to find good, acceptable measures for partnership, whether it be bilateral, multilateral, or trilateral, and at the regional level. We have to work together, the national level. The government measures is not enough. Thailand and ASEAN has good examples and experience to work with the government, the finance, the businesses, and the people to work together hand in hand to find good, acceptable measures, which is in accordance with the UN target to reduce CO2 emissions. Another important issue is to consider human rights and business and human rights agenda. We have to respect one another. We have to provide remedies for the people who are affected by climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. Thank you. Next, we have His Excellency Xavier Bettel, Prime Minister of Luxembourg. Please do share your thoughts with us on climate action. Thank you.
Mesdames, Messieurs, merci.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here with us and to talk about goals which are very important for me. These meetings, there's a little of deja vu here. I remember the meeting in Paris 4 years ago, and I remember the commitments that we all undertook. And it's important to remember those commitments. It's true, it's not always popular at the national level to take on grand ambitions, but it is necessary to do so sometimes. And currently, when one says that one wants to reduce the temperature, I don't see anything on the horizon to help us to do that. And on the contrary, science shows us that we're far from the goal that we set for ourselves. Can we talk about a dismal failure? Can we point the finger at each other? Can we say we didn't do enough and it's each other's fault? Or we could say, well, there's still time The clock is ticking, and it's time to be ambitious and bold, to shoulder our responsibilities and take action before it's too late. In Luxembourg, now we're not used to having demonstrations, and yet we have thousands of young people who are mobilizing, who are demanding that the politicians do something. And yet our government is doing a lot, but I'd like it to go faster. I'd like to stop giving speeches and talking and meeting to talk about our different points, but actually to move on to concrete and swift action. This approach of wanting to make progress, that's what I want. That's what our civil society wants. That's what our young people are expecting from us. So that's why I heartily commend the initiative of convening this summit, for which I have 3 announcements. Now, the first one, earlier I was talking about young people. It's true that young people don't vote. Well, okay, so why should I do this or that? Is the pressure from young people actually important? I think as a politician, to not want to listen to young people is basically mortgaging their future. So what was popular yesterday and thinking about yesterday and pleasing some, but not thinking about tomorrow, is the worst thing a politician can do, which is to mortgage the future. You need to know how to do this. Now, in my country, in terms of emissions reduction and our daily action with a long-term action is absolutely necessary for taking action now. Our goal is to bring our emissions down to between 50 and 55% by 2050. Luxembourg is a small country, and we have an economy which is open with a pretty large population, and still we want to meet that goal. And even European ambitions, and I shouldn't say it, believe me, even in Europe, we're slowly making progress, even at that level. And my country decided to be even bolder, and our figure for 2030 was 40%, and we actually want to increase that to somewhere between 50 and 55%. And I know that these are goals that are very ambitious and might require some change, but still, what's important in change, a lot of people say, well, we should ban that. I don't think we should ban things right away. I think it's important to encourage people, motivate people, give them an incentive to participate. And sometimes when I go to some countries or some families, see that separating out the trash and recycling isn't something that everyone does, but these small gestures are important, and it means that people are participating in the effort. And that's important before banning everything. You need to encourage first, educate, raise awareness, starting with children, make them aware of what's necessary to do. It's fine to talk about climate change, but we also need to think about how we can actively participate. And as of next year, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg will have free public transportation for all. We've decided that public transportation for everyone will be free, whether it's in the cities or villages, whether it's the tram, the bus, the train, everyone will have access to public transportation free of charge. It needs to be fast, effective, and money shouldn't be a factor. Second commitment is solidarity. For some of you, you already know it. My country is a country that believes that solidarity vis-a-vis the most impoverished is very important. And I should admit that my country is not one of the ones that's the most exposed to the consequences of climate change, but we need to think about them. We need to be sensitive to them. My country decided to make available for the next 5 years 200 million euros. Now, some people will say, well, that's nothing compared to the billions that others have said, but I only have 600,000 people in my country, if you don't know that. So that's 303 euros per person in my country. And if you compare that to countries with larger populations, you'll see that it isn't a large amount per person. And this is to help developing countries. And our annual contribution is also partially reserved for the Green Climate Fund, will double compared to the last year. And in it, we will have, this will be in addition to our contributions to ODA, where Luxembourg continues to set aside 1% of its GDP for the purposes of ODA. We will also be helping with any conflict or any problem that might exist in one country or another. We're also resolved to more systematically use innovative financing means in order to mobilize additional financial means, which is absolutely key, especially from the private sector. Earlier, we heard about the green financing and the work in coordination with the European Development Bank. It's true that we are working on a reality that can work, which is development based on low greenhouse gases. And my country would like to be a leader in the area of climate and sustainable financing. For example, there's already the Luxembourg Green Exchange, the Climate Finance Accelerator, and in the future, we will have the Luxembourg Sustainable Finance Initiative. So these are some of the innovative ideas that we're behind. And we are also counting on the financial support from the United Nations, working with the UNEP. My government established a roadmap for sustainable financing for Luxembourg, geared to development of new financial products and training in order to meet the needs of the financial sector. I'm trying to be brief here before you and say this in just a few words, but I think we also need to go beyond national ambitions. I remember a few years ago in the European Council, I proposed something that everyone was shocked by. I said, it's not enough to commit. The person that doesn't accept, who thinks it's not necessary to make an effort, should make an effort to think about how at the European level and the national level, and I'm happy that the new president of the European Commission is aware of this, to take measures to motivate everyone. If it's not done voluntarily, then we will have no choice than to make people understand that the European economy needs partners that doesn't just look at figures, but also looks at the legacy that we will be leaving for future generations. Thank you.
Xavier Bettel, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. So we now move into our next session. And as our next presenters make their way to the stage, I'll just set the context for you. So the least developed countries are faced not only with significant development challenges, but are also dealing with some of the worst impacts of climate change, which magnify those challenges. And climate action is a precondition for effective sustainable development. And the LDCs are very much at the forefront of these efforts. So we've welcomed